Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a southern city with a dark and gothic history, is once again gripped by fear.
Baton Rouge was, particularly in the female population, kind of in mass hysteria.
An epidemic of serial killers has the people of Baton Rouge looking over their shoulders in terror and panic.
It's just not safe to be out in the community alone in remote areas.
In a 10-year period, we've had 5 serial killers in Baton Rouge. That's incredible.
Yeah, I would say so.
And this sadistic madman, still on the loose, has been tormenting cops for quite a while. His string of horrific attacks actually began in the 90s, and police believe a single psycho killer is behind all the carnage.
Sheriff detectives say they found the nude body of a 43-year-old woman.
Every nightly newscast reporting the discovery of yet another woman stabbed, strangled, raped, and murdered.
It has happened again.
He would rape each of these women, and then to cover it up, beat them to death, stab them to death.
But one victim escapes, and she points a finger at a mentally challenged, convicted voyeur, Derek Todd Lee. DNA evidence ties Lee to the rapes and murders of at least 7 women. Cops have their serial killer. The people of Baton Rouge can breathe a sigh of relief, but the nightmare is anything but over.
We realized that there were murders that were being committed or had been committed that probably were not the result of Derek Todd Lee.
Cops soon learn there's a new serial killer on the loose.
My boss walked in and went, "You're not going to believe this. We have a second one."
His crimes against women are so perverse, the madman even has seasoned prosecutor Prem Burns shivering in fear.
A true serial killer, taking souvenirs, dismembering victims.
You're talking about someone that's sexually deviant.
His calling cards would prove to be far more brutal, gruesome, and cruel than Baton Rouge had ever seen before.
They were all really petite women. It was very obvious that he chose women that he could handle.
And all also linked by a distinctive and grisly manner of death.
All of the victims were killed by use of nylon zip ties.
The killings begin again with the discovery of Catherine Hall, found at the end of this dark rural road, nude, strangled, her body hacked and sliced to the bone.
Her legs were really sliced up bad.
And chillingly, Catherine's body is found displayed beneath a street sign in a twisted parody of death.
She was on her back in a kind of balletic pose next to a dead-end sign, which I thought was his humor in a very sick kind of way, dead end.
And one more horrifying detail.
He had sex with his victims after they were dead.
Very close examination of her mouth showed that there was a pubic hair with a root ball, which allows full DNA testing.
Is it obvious to police that you have the potential of a ritual
Yes.
serial killer?
Immediately they said this is not a normal heat-of-the-moment homicide. Knew we had a problem.
A problem that would escalate when the killer ups his ante with another murder even more vicious and gruesome.
Johnny Mae Williams, face down, in the woods, decomposing, covered up. You could barely tell it was a human being. The little boy found her, called his dad back, and his father said, don't play around. And that's not a funny thing to say. Daddy goes back and sees that there is a human being there.
The 45-year-old Johnny Mae Williams has been strangled to death. Her body, once again, laid out for maximum horror.
He obviously had posed her, looking for the shock factor, because her legs were sliced down the back and on the front, pretty good.
But Johnny Mae's killer wasn't done with her, even after her death.
Had her arms folded up under her. When she was rolled over, her arms fell out, and it was at that point that we saw that her hands had been cut off. He was getting more and more bold and brazen, I guess, since he had gotten away with it this long.
But that bold and brazen act would give up another genetic sign of her killer.
Even though her hands had been cut off, they looked at the bones, and a human hair was found, and it was a body hair, and they could tell it was from a Caucasian male.
Several months later, the butcher strikes again.
About 7:40, two residents from this area were walking, looking for their dog. They stopped at this bridge and observed what appeared to be a white female.
That body is Donna Johnston, and her remains make one thing shockingly clear. This crazed killer is growing more sick and sadistic than before.
She had a tattoo, butterfly, on her leg, and after she was dead, he cut that off.
She fought with him, and we know she fought with him because his DNA was under the fingernails of her right hand. She only had one hand left because he amputated her left arm right below the elbow.
So now you've got 3 women badly mutilated. You know you've got a serial killer on your hands.
Yes.
Detectives are armed with a load of DNA evidence, but there's a problem. The DNA profile doesn't match anyone in the system. Investigators scan every blade of grass around Donna's body, looking for additional evidence. And there, pressed into the mud, a blink and you'd miss it clue.
It was actually a cow pasture where she was dumped, and there were some ruts where vehicles had been passing back and forth. It was really very significant looking tire tracks, so we did tire castings. It was a Goodyear tire.
The city of Baton Rouge is under siege. Hacked and butchered bodies of women turning up strangled with zip ties around their necks, then dumped in empty fields. A serial killer is on a blood-soaked rampage in the dead of night.
Every victim was found totally nude, no identification near them, making it very hard to find their identity.
Nervous and frustrated cops are stumped. Then a stone's throw from the dismembered body of Donna Johnston, an eagle-eyed investigator spots a clue embedded in the soft ground: fresh tire tracks.
That is what I call gumshoe police work. He looked at those tire tracks, took pictures, made casts of it, and he would not let it go.
And cops catch a break when the tracks come back. The tire is very rare.
We do a little research, and there's literally only maybe a couple of hundred sets of these particular tire sold in the entire Baton Rouge area.
Now they've got to match them and hope they lead to the serial killer. Major Brian White dispatches his task force, talking to everyone who purchased these tires in the last 12 months.
That information was divided up into leads for us to go to these people's houses and ask them, do they still have a vehicle with those tires?
But Major White also needs something else, a swab of DNA from the people who bought those tires. Remember, detectives have already gathered DNA samples from the victims, from Catherine Hall's mouth, the bones of Johnny Mae Williams' severed arms, and under the fingernails of Donna Johnston's one remaining arm. But none of the samples match anyone currently in the DNA database. A tire might place a car in that field, but DNA could tie the victims to their killer.
And we asked them if they would voluntarily submit to an oral DNA swab. But a lot of people were like, I've never killed anyone, sure I will. But that's ultimately what led us to Sean.
Sean is Sean Vincent Gillis. He's one of those 200 tire owners in the area. Gillis is unemployed, soft-spoken and intelligent, living in this home owned by his mom. He has no criminal history and, by all accounts, just a run-of-the-mill, mild-mannered science fiction geek.
He was a huge Star Trek fan. He had on a USS Enterprise belt buckle. Just different kind of guy.
But it's not what he's wearing. It's what he says to the detective at his door that sounds a red alert.
Very suspicious statements.
Then another investigator tells Detective White something that sends a shiver down his spine.
And he said, Brian, you're not gonna believe this. He said, This guy knows one of the victims, said she's ridden in his car.
Sean is now admitting that he knows Johnny Mae.
He said Johnny Mae Williams was a friend of his, said, oh, and matter of fact, she's ridden in my vehicle before. She's been in my home, I used to pay her to clean my house.
Gillis even admitted to being near the crime scene and offered a strange excuse as to why his tire tracks were in that field when police asked him to come down for what they called a little friendly Q&A.
I had some beer and needed to go to the bathroom real bad and knew I wasn't going to make it to the house.
He kind of was like, yeah, I was there, but it wasn't at the time of this murder. Yes, I was there, but it wasn't to dump a body. Yes, I was there, but it was to use the bathroom.
You know what I'm saying? And my bladder was, how they put it, Cheech and Chong put it one time, my eyes are floating. Yeah. That's how it felt.
So he had an excuse for everything.
And if cops should find any blood in his car, Gillis has an excuse for that too. And this one is a true original.
About a month after we got the car, she got her period.
And he made one of the dumbest statements I've ever heard. He said, well, yeah, my wife, Terry, he said at that time she was on her menstrual cycle.
She had a period and it just so, I mean, it's like I said, it looked like a massacre in the front seat.
He said, man, and blood just started flying everywhere in the vehicle.
Because that was just the craziest story ever.
It was insane. And Max said, well, let me ask you this then. Is there any reason that blood could be in the back seat?
Gillis's answer is just as ridiculous.
That shouldn't be. I mean, barring, wind blowing, I'm not saying you might not find one of Johnny's hairs back there, but you shouldn't find anything from anyone else.
And he said, well, yeah, I think the windows were down and probably some blood flew out the window and got blown back in.
Because that's really how blood travels.
And everyone at that time looked at you and said, it's him.
I'll be right back, okay? So much for a little friendly Q&A.
When he made those statements, at that point, I turned to one of our detectives and said, draft a search warrant for his vehicle right now. And we did.
And analyzing Gillis's cheek swab is now top priority.
We called the crime lab and said, this DNA swab we're bringing you, put whoever you got to put on it, but if you could expedite, we think we have our guy. And they started working on it immediately.
But the lab would have to work fast, even with the tire match and Gillis's outrageous statements. Cops can't hold him.
But you had to let him go because you didn't have evidence yet.
We had some very incriminating statements, but it was all circumstantial.
And that terrifies detectives. What if Gillis takes off, or worse, what if the stress drives Gillis to kill again? Cops are now secretly tailing Sean Vincent Gillis's every move.
We had people watching the house. We had people watching every possible exit in and out of that subdivision.
Cops are pacing, ready to pounce.
And then we just went and waited on crime lab results.
It would be one of the longest nights of the detective's life.
It's kind of like an expectant father maybe pacing in the waiting room.
Sean Vincent Gillis. Cops think he's responsible for the ghastly murders of 3 women in Baton Rouge.
They made a very short but very fine tape of him where he was very nonchalant. Oh yeah, I knew her.
She cleaned my house. I had her clean my house.
There's DNA evidence collected from the bodies of 3 victims.
The DNA evidence obtained all came from the same male.
But so far, no one can prove that male is Gillis. And he didn't feel much like talking anymore once detectives turned up the heat during his interrogation.
Right after that, Sean kind of started getting irritated. He said, look, guys, he said, I haven't killed anyone. You told me if I came, when I was ready to come home, you'd bring me home. I want to go home. I'm ready to go.
Without lab results tying him to the crimes, cops have no choice but to cut Gillis loose.
We had his subdivision locked down. He wasn't leaving without us finding out, because we were scared once we got him home, he was going to panic and try to run.
That fear has Major Brian White literally pacing by the phone for the DNA lab results. Then, after several excruciating hours of waiting, the phone rings.
When they called that night, they said, it's him.
You had him.
We had him.
We absolutely knew who the killer was.
The next call White makes is to a judge to get a warrant for Gillis's arrest.
And as soon as the warrants were signed, the SWAT team made preparations to hit his house, and they hit it shortly thereafter.
Cops swarm Gillis's home, and they're in for a shock. The killer doesn't live alone.
I think he was found in bed with Terry.
That's right, Gillis has a girlfriend, Terry Lemoyne, and Terry says she had no idea why a SWAT team is busting down her door.
I'm yelling, "What's going on? What's going on?" And I look at Sean, and Sean just shrugs his shoulders and says, "Sorry, honey bunny." And one of the officers turns around and looks at me and says, "Didn't you know you're living with a serial killer?" The whole world came tumbling down that night.
It's a seemingly quiet world Terry has shared with Sean Vincent Gillis for 9 years, a long time since Terry, a convenience store clerk, first laid eyes on the shy, quirky Gillis.
My best friend walks in and says, "Sean, this is Terry. Terry, this is Sean. Y'all have everything in common. You have to get to know each other."
Well, what did she think that the two of you had in common?
We both loved science fiction. We both loved Star Trek. We both loved collecting things.
At first, there's no clue to what Gillis really liked to collect.
He was cute in a little teddy bear sort of way. The type of person you'd want to bring home to mom, actually.
Really?
Yes.
Platonic dating leads to Terry moving into Gillis's dilapidated house where things, according to Terry, stayed platonic.
Sean didn't believe in sex.
What does that mean?
I asked him about it one time, and he told me that he had been taught that it was a nasty thing and that he shouldn't do that.
Terry still worked at the convenience store. Gillis's only job was picking Terry up after her shift. There's often odd behavior, but Gillis again always has an excuse.
One morning he came and picked me up, and the car had an awful odor in it. And I was so tired, and I was like, "What is that smell in the car?" And he said he had hit an animal on the way picking me up. Came home, I came inside, went to bed. He went to washing the car.
Terry also notices Gillis is racking up a lot of miles on the car.
And what's his explanation?
Well, I got kind of concerned and wanted to know who he was driving around with.
You thought he was cheating.
I thought he was.
But that's not what he was doing.
No.
What was he really doing?
I found out from the police that he was hunting.
Hunting in what sense?
Looking basically for someone to kill.
Now, 9 years later, surrounded by cops with her boyfriend in cuffs, Terry still can't believe it.
When everything happened, I laughed at the police when they told me why they arrested him.
You laughed?
I literally laughed and told them, "Boy, do you have the wrong house." They said he admitted it. And at which point my mouth just dropped and I said, "Well, I'll have to ask him myself."
Terry Lemoyne shared a bed with accused serial killer Sean Vincent Gillis for 9 years, but she's convinced cops have her boyfriend all wrong.
I never saw anything bad about him.
So Terry goes to get the truth straight from Gillis himself.
I just walked into the police station and picked up the little phone and asked. I just said, "Sean, did you do everything that these police officers said you did?" And again, the little thing with the head drops his eyes and says, "Yeah, sorry, honey bunny," again. And I just got up and turned around and walked out.
But Terry isn't the only one to hear Gillis come clean. Sitting for hours in a cramped interrogation room, cops hear every sick secret come spilling out.
I'm sorry I hurt people. But I would do it again.
Once he started confessing, he confessed. He laid it out A to Z.
If anything, my abuseless life comes out, help the little girl of today not to be the premature corpses of tomorrow.
Starting with this, the 3 victims he's accused of killing. That's just the tip of a horrifying iceberg.
It was just like something clicked in Sean's brain, because at some point he looked at me and said, "Hey, you got a pencil?" I said, "Sure." And he started wrapping them off.
What, he listed the names of the victims?
He started naming other victims. He said, get ready.
How many did he admit to?
He admitted to the 3 that we had him on, and he admitted to 5 more.
Unsolved murders that had stumped detectives for years. Hardy Schmidt, Joyce Williams, Lillian Robinson, Marilyn Nevels, and 81-year-old Ann Bryan.
Were you shocked at the number?
I was shocked at some of the names he threw out there.
Before his arrest, Gillis's stories and excuses were almost comical.
Yeah, period, and it just so... I mean, it's like I said, it looked like a massacre in the front seat.
But now, Gillis knows the jig is up, and his latest interrogation is no joke.
He was someone that, in a way, he was charming. He was very talkative. He was so talkative. I was very curious to see where he would go next.
And where Gillis goes next is terrifying. In chilling, matter-of-fact detail, he recounts his ritual after Terry left for the night shift.
You let me out on the street, I'll find somebody before sundown.
Hunting women, strangling and mutilating them, then using their bodies for unspeakable acts of sexual gratification.
When you say hunting, I was strictly going out looking for a victim.
Gillis's prey? Prostitutes, drug addicts, anyone who looked helpless or willing to get into his car.
Disposable people, people that society would not miss. He considered them to be worthless.
Even beat to death looks better than that photo you've got over right there.
Once inside his car, Gillis wasted no time in brandishing his crude instrument of death.
He used zip ties, and he showed how effective a zip tie was.
White nylon tie lock. I mean, we're talking 2.5 feet long at least.
And you can make
maybe
a loop
3 feet. Yeah, just make a loop and you've got a few inches to spare. And flip it on her head.
And he made the sound as he was doing it, and it was quick.
Too bad, you know. So, yeah.
Do you remember her saying anything to you during this fight? Like,
Other than a lot of no more, you know, why are you doing that? And I really didn't have an answer for her other than, you know, I'm killing you, you know.
Then, in detail that is hard to stomach, Gillis casually explains what he did after the bodies went cold.
Pretty much brought her back home from there to my house.
Like a macabre, erotic shower with the body of Donna Johnston.
I held her up, bathed her, held her to me, you know.
so you were still on her and stuff too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were taking a shower, you know.
Yeah.
Giving a manicure to the severed hands of Johnny Mae Williams.
I painted her nails, fly her hands. I think I did, though.
You painted her fingernails?
And even more disturbing, while his girlfriend Terry is at work, Gillis performs a deranged autopsy of Joyce Williams right on the kitchen floor.
She had beautiful legs. One thing that I recalled about her. And I wanted to keep those legs. I like a good set of gams, you know, a good set of legs. Looking at it, just the curvature of it, it's beautiful. Good. You know, notwithstanding, it was cut off of a person.
When they sprayed the baseboards of his kitchen with luminol, the baseboards under the cabinets, that it just lit up like a Christmas tree.
What did he say he did in that kitchen?
Said he decapitated her right there.
At that point, I pretty much moved on to the head.
Okay.
And
that the same knife
with the same knife. It went through the throat like that. I mean, it's like cutting butter.
Gillis's computer delivers even more evidence of his ghoulish trophy hunting.
During the search of his house and his computer was seized, he had taken one of his victims out to a dump and staged his own crime scene. Took pictures of the victim in the trunk of his vehicle, and he captured the greater portion of his license plate in the picture, and it was still on his computer.
So you had him again?
Again.
He was very excited and proud of his behavior. It was all about Sean, and he completely enjoyed that.
Criminal profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole is face-to-face with Gillis and sees his secrets go even deeper. The seed of Gillis's depravity was planted early.
One of his paraphilic behaviors was necrophilia, and manifested itself probably before 10.
Behavior that continued with a sexual fascination with his mother.
Did you ever think about having sex with her?
Yes, of course. She was not an unattractive woman, not unattractive. In fact, you see her in the mirror now. I thought if she passed away, y'all would find me in bed with her.
Now with Gillis himself admitting every gruesome detail, this case is locked up. Or is it? Right from the start, before his confessions even begin, Gillis was savvy enough to say this.
Yeah, I think I'm really shit for a lawyer.
At some point, he realized the seriousness and made the comment to the interrogating officer, you know, I think I should have an attorney.
With that comment comes a big problem.
The information that he provided to the police after he asked for an attorney, was any of that information permissible in court as well?
It was not.
And that means Sean Vincent Gillis might get away with it all. The monster has been caged. Sean Vincent Gillis shackled after confessing to 8 of the most grisly murders in Louisiana history. But could a calculated risk by detectives end up setting him free?
If he would be willing to tell us some information that would absolutely tie him to other homicides, we were certainly willing to listen.
Here's the problem. During his interrogation, Gillis did request an attorney. So now his graphic and gruesome confession describing his thrill kills in sickening detail can't be used in court.
To be absolutely clear here, you knew you had him on 3 murders.
Yes.
But cops were sure Gillis had more victims out there, and they were desperate to find them.
And you wanted the information for them and for their families.
Correct.
Without those videotaped confessions, prosecutors were sweating. Would an admitted serial killer slip through their fingers? All those fears are put to rest just as Gillis's trial is set to begin.
I'll never forget this. I was in the courtroom, and one of the female deputies just kind of nudged me after a hearing in this case and hands me a letter from Tammy saying, I need to give you these. And there are the letters, put on a silver platter for me.
Those letters are from Tammy Prepara, a friend of Gillis's final victim, Donna Johnston. Tammy's been corresponding with Sean Vincent Gillis in jail.
And I went, bingo. Bingo, that's another nail in his coffin. She said, I never thought he would answer me. Honest to goodness, I never thought he'd be so stupid to answer me.
But Gillis does answer, and within those letters, an absolute bombshell, a written confession. Gillis details Donna's last moments from the eyes of her killer. He writes, your friend died quickly. She was so drunk, it only took about 1.5 minutes to succumb to unconsciousness and then death. Honestly, her last words were, I can't breathe. Yours oh so beyond sorry, Sean Vincent Gillis.
So that letter gave us our first-degree murder beyond any doubt whatsoever.
Tammy's letters also give the trial one of its most dramatic moments. Prosecutor Prem Burns has the jury stop and watch the clock for 90 excruciating seconds. In the letters Gillis wrote, that's how long it took Donna Johnston to die.
You also said her last words.
I did. And it was to go, I can't breathe. She's dead. But to be looking in the eyes of the person that is killing you is something I have never been able to fathom as a human being or as a district attorney for all the years that I've practiced.
Sadly, Tammy Prepara would never see it played out in court.
Tammy ended up getting cancer. Tammy died before the trial. She still did it. Even in death, Donna's friend came through by just writing those letters to him and getting those answers and giving them honestly to me and not asking a thing in return.
With the overwhelming evidence, including DNA and now Gillis's own self-incriminating letters, the verdict is undeniable. Guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 3 life terms.
I think if Sean had not been apprehended, he would have continued to kill.
At Gillis's house in a quiet neighborhood, a magnolia tree blooms in the front yard. Inside is where some of the most unspeakable acts played out on a kitchen floor.
So you totally decapitated her.
Yes, I did.
This kitchen floor. Believe it or not, Gillis's girlfriend, Terry Lemoyne, still lives here.
The police told me that he had dismembered one of his victims in the kitchen.
We're sitting in the kitchen.
That is correct.
Where was the spot? Was it literally right here? And
Literally right there. I would say in those four squares right there.
do you ever have feelings when you're standing here at the kitchen sink and think back to the horrible things that happened here?
No, that would be like thinking of, I can't live on this piece of property because there was a war here. It's a building. That's the way I look at it.
And the memories of madness aren't confined to the house. Gillis's blood-soaked car, Gillis nicknamed Buffy after the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, still sits rotting in Terry's backyard.
You bought this car for Sean.
Yes.
And what did he end up doing with it?
Hunting for women to kill and transporting dead bodies.
Do you think you're going to end up selling this to someone who has like a morbid collection of things having to do with serial killers?
I have no idea. I've thought of donating the thing. The company that I bought it from, they didn't want it back because they said it was a biohazard.
Well, yeah.
And I've never bothered myself with it, actually.
You still live in the house and you still have the car. Why?
The house didn't do anything wrong. I mean, what was left of what he did has been disposed of. It's been taken away.
So you don't feel a bad or negative energy in this house?
No. Too much good has happened since.
After he went to jail, what did you do?
I redid the floors and redid some of the walls.
Prosecutor Prem Byrne says all the remodeling in the world will never erase the horror that Sean Vincent Gillis inflicted on 8 innocent people, their families, and the city of Baton Rouge.
This was like a walking piece of evil, hunting and preying after other human beings. Those women had more life and more worth in them than he will ever have if he lives to be 100 years.